Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was trained by Dr. Strange to master mystic arts? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind on the roof was a lonely thing. It was the city wind, carrying the distant scent of exhaust fumes, fried noodles from a street vendor 10 stories below, and the faint, metallic tang of an approaching rainstorm. It whipped around Izuku Midoriya, tugging at the lapels of his black Gakurin uniform and plastering his dark green hair across his forehead. He didn't bother to brush it away. His arms, thin and trembling, were locked tight around the cool, painted metal of the safety railing. It's not wrong to dream. However, you need to be realistic, kid. All Might's words weren't just an echo in his head. They were a physical force. They were the weight pressing down on his shoulders, the hollow ache in his sternum, the leaden fatigue in his limbs. Each word was a perfectly crafted chisel, chipping away at the very foundation of his existence until all that was left was a pile of rubble where a dream used to be. He had waited his entire life to hear words from his idol. He had rehearsed the moment in his mind a million times since he was 4 years old, a tiny boy in an All Might onesie watching that same viral video over and over, his heart swelling with a fierce, burning hope. The words he'd imagined were always some variation of, "Yes, young man, with a heart like yours, you too can be a hero." The reality was so much crueler. Realistic. The word was a slap. A pragmatic, sensible, soul-crushing word that had no place in the world of heroes and villains, of plus ultra and smiling in the face of danger. Izuku's gaze drifted downward. The city sprawled below, a dizzying tapestry of concrete, glass, and neon. Cars were tiny, glowing insects crawling along asphalt veins. People were mere specks, living their lives secure in the knowledge that heroes, people with quirks, with power, were watching over them. They were all part of a system, a world, that he had just been definitively told he could never truly belong to. His fingers, white-knuckled on the railing, began to ache. He loosened his grip, his right hand drifting to the scorched and bubbling cover of his notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. It felt heavy, stupid. A child's foolish scrapbook. All Might had signed it, his bold signature a mocking scar across the burnt page. A souvenir from the day his life ended. Maybe try becoming a police officer. They get a lot of flack because the villains are always caught by heroes, but it's a fine and respectable job. Respectable. Fine. The words were meant to be a comfort, a gentle letdown. But to Izuku, they were insults. They were a pat on the head, a consolation prize for a game he wasn't even allowed to play. He didn't want a fine job. He didn't want to be respectable. He wanted to be the one who saved people with a smile. He wanted to be a symbol, the kind of person who could look at a crying child and say, "It's fine now." Why? "Because I am here." A choked, wet sob escaped his throat. It was a pathetic sound, lost to the uncaring wind. He squeezed his eyes shut, tears finally breaking free and tracing hot, wet paths through the grime on his cheeks. His mind, a cruel and efficient machine for self-torture, replayed another voice. Bakugos. If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Just take a swan dive off the roof and pray you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. The wind gusted, pushing against him. For a horrifying, crystal-clear second, Izuku understood the appeal. The thought flickered in the back of his mind, a venomous spark in the darkness. It wasn't a plan, it wasn't a desire. It was just an acknowledgement of an open door. An end to the pain. An escape from the suffocating reality of being useless. Quirkless. Deku. He leaned forward slightly, his breath catching in his throat. The world tilted. Boom! The sound was not just heard, it was felt. A deep, concussive thud that vibrated through the soles of his shoes and up his spine. It was the sound of chaos. Of a villain. Izuku's head snapped up, his own despair momentarily forgotten, replaced by the deeply ingrained reflex of a decade of hero worship. His eyes, wide and red-rimmed, scanned the streets below. A plume of black smoke was rising a few blocks away, near the Takoba shopping arcade. The same direction he had come from. The same direction he'd seen, the sludge villain. His blood ran cold. The villain that All Might had captured, had he dropped it? When Izuku had clung to his leg? Was this his fault? Panic, sharp and immediate, lanced through him. He had to see. He had to know. He scrambled toward the edge of the roof that faced the explosion, his legs still wobbly. He saw it instantly, the familiar, grotesque form of the sludge monster, swirling and thrashing in the narrow street. Heroes were there, Kamui Woods, Death Arms, Backdraft, but they were being ineffective. The villain's fluid body was a difficult target, and the space was too confined. And there, trapped in the epicenter of the foul, swirling muck, was a thrashing figure. Spiky, ash-blonde hair, the uniform of his own middle school, Kaken. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. This was his fault. His fault. He had distracted All Might. He had caused the villain to escape, and now Bakugo, angry, arrogant, cruel Bakugo, was going to die. And it would be his fault. The despair came crashing back, but this time it was different. It was no longer a passive, numbing fog. It was an active, agonizing force, a maelstrom of self-hatred, terror for another's life, and a desperate, primal scream in his soul to do something. He couldn't move. His feet were rooted to the rooftop. The heroes couldn't get close. All Might was out of time. He had seen the steam rising from the hero's body. He knew the secret. There was no one coming, and in that moment of absolute, perfect helplessness, something inside Izuku Midoriya shifted. It was not a quirk activating. It was not a physical change. It was a convergence of emotional and spiritual energies so pure, so potent, that it defied the simple physics of his world. The white-hot, selfless desire to save a life, a desire that had defined him since childhood, crashed headlong into the black, crushing despair of his own powerlessness. Hope and hopelessness, will and futility, love and self-loathing, all of it twisted together within his soul. It did not create an explosion. It created a resonance. A single, silent, perfect note that sang out from the rooftop, not into the air, but through the very fabric of reality. It was a ripple in a pond, but the pond was the multiverse. It was the desperate prayer of a truly righteous heart, amplified by the agony of a broken spirit. It was a point of immense, impossible potential, and across dimensions it was heard. In a place that was both everywhere and nowhere, Dr. Stephen Strange felt it. He was in the main chamber of the New York Sanctum Sanctorum, meditating. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment, sandalwood incense, and the faint, electric hum of contained power. Sunlight streamed through the oculus, the grand circular window emblazoned with the seal of the Vishanti, painting shifting patterns of light on the ancient wooden floor. The cloak of levitation hovered patiently by the grand staircase, its collar twitching occasionally as if swatting an unseen fly. Strange was not merely sitting. His mind was adrift in the cosmic currents, his consciousness a net cast wide to monitor the dimensional barriers of his reality. He was listening for the dissonant chords of an extra-dimensional incursion, the scratching of some eldritch entity at the walls of the world, the telltale hum of unauthorized temporal manipulation. His senses were attuned to the cacophony of the multiverse, a chaotic orchestra of infinite possibilities, and then he heard it. Through the endless noise, a single, pure note. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a threat. In the grand scheme of things, it was infinitesimally small. But it was perfect. It was a note of such profound, unblemished intent that it cut through the cosmic static like a beam of light through murky water. It was the sound of a will forged in the purest fire of altruism, screaming from a cage of absolute mortal limitation. Strange's eyes, still closed, narrowed. This was not the brutish signature of a creature from the dark dimension. It wasn't the chaotic energy of a rogue sorcerer. It was potential, raw, untamed, and unbelievably pure. A nexus point. A human soul vibrating with such intensity that it was causing the very walls between worlds to thin around it. His astral form flickered, and for a moment, the room seemed to fade into a gray, ethereal version of itself. He focused on the note, tracing it back to its source. The astral winds carried him across oceans and continents in an instant, his perception zeroing in on a small island nation in the east. Japan. A bustling city. A specific rooftop. He saw the boy. A child, really? Small for his age, with a storm of green-black hair and eyes like emeralds, currently flooded with tears. Strange's gaze was not limited to the physical. He could see the boy's spirit, his very essence. It was a flickering candle in a hurricane of despair, yet the flame itself was brilliant, unwavering. It was the flame of a protector, a guardian, a hero, trapped in a shell that the world had deemed insufficient. With a thought, Strange delved deeper, reading the recent psychic residue in the area. He saw the skeletal form of a blonde giant, heard the well-intentioned but devastating words. "You need to be realistic." He saw the boy's entire world crumble. He saw the smoke in the distance, the boy's terror, and the explosive, desperate wish that followed. "I have to save him. Someone. Anyone." There it was. The nexus. The perfect storm. Strange's astral form receded back into his physical body. He opened his eyes, the ancient chamber of the sanctum snapping back into focus. The cloak of levitation drifted over, settling onto his shoulders with a familiar, comforting weight. This was not a threat to be neutralized. This was an opportunity. A candidate. The Ancient One had always told him that the mystic arts chose the sorcerer as much as the sorcerer chose them. It required not inherent power, but an indomitable will. A capacity for learning. And a spirit strong enough to withstand the horrors that lurked in the dark between worlds. This boy, crying on a rooftop in Mizurufu, Japan, had a spirit brighter than any he had seen in decades. "Interesting," Strange murmured, his voice a low baritone that barely disturbed the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. He raised his left hand, his fingers tracing a complex pattern in the air. His other hand, adorned with the two-fingered sling ring, moved in a slow, deliberate circle before him. Reality began to tear, not with violence, but with surgical precision. A pinprick of orange light grew into a churning vortex of golden sparks, showering the floor like a supernatural firework. Through the shimmering portal, the view was not of another dimension, but of a drab, concrete rooftop and a heartbroken teenage boy. Dr. Stephen Strange, master of the mystic arts and sorcerer supreme of Earth, took a step forward. Izuku was so lost in his panic and self-loathing that he didn't notice it at first. It wasn't a sight, but a sound. A sound like 1,000 tiny champagne glasses shattering at once, mixed with the crackle of a bonfire. He blinked, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. And then he saw it. 10 feet away from him, the air itself was coming apart. It wasn't a quirk, not like anything he had ever seen or analyzed. There was no person generating it. It was just happening. A circle of brilliant, incandescent orange sparks was churning in midair. They weren't burning the rooftop. They were just there, a wound of golden light cut into the gray afternoon. Inside the circle, reality swirled like paint in water, showing a distorted, fish-eye view of a grand, sunlit room filled with strange artifacts. Izuku froze, every muscle in his body tensing. Villain? Was this a new villain? A warped quirk? Was he being targeted? His mind raced, cataloging possibilities, but came up empty. This was alien. This was wrong. A figure stepped through the portal. He was tall, with sharp, aristocratic features and streaks of silver at his temples that bespoke a wisdom far beyond his apparent age. He wore ornate, layered robes of deep blue and gold that seemed more suited to a monastery than a modern city. A striking red cloak with a high, pointed collar was clasped around his neck, and it seemed to shift and ripple with a life of its own, its corners twitching as if tasting the wind. His eyes, a piercing gray-blue, held an unnerving intelligence. They weren't looking at Izuku with pity or contempt or aggression. They were looking at him with curiosity. The man took another step onto the roof, and the fiery portal behind him snapped shut with a sound like a whip crack, leaving only the scent of ozone and burnt sugar in the air. "Izuku Midoriya," the man said. His voice was calm, resonant, and his Japanese was flawless, yet carried an accent Izuku couldn't place. It wasn't American, or British, or anything he knew. It was older. Izuku flinched, stumbling back a step. Who are you? How do you know my name? Is this your quirk? The questions tumbled out, a nervous waterfall of his default state. He was terrified, but the analyst in him was already firing on all cylinders. Warp Gate, Self-generating, no visible user strain, instant closure. Possible teleportation or dimensional travel. The user is a male, estimated late 30s or early 40s, high-end costume suggests underground hero or... It is not a quirk, the man interrupted, as if he'd heard Izuku's frantic, silent muttering. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his hands clasped before him. And as for how I know your name, let's just say your despair was rather loud. Izuku stared, his mind struggling to process the statement. His despair was loud? What did that even mean? I don't understand. No, you don't, the man agreed, not unkindly. Your world is built on a very specific understanding of power. It is biological. Genetic. A physical gift or curse bestowed at birth. You call them quirks. It is a system that has defined your life, and today, it has broken your heart. The man's words were so accurate, so incisive, they felt like a physical blow. He gestured vaguely at the city around them. You believe that because you lack this specific biological key, you are locked out of the castle. That you are, in the parlance of your peers, useless. Izuku winced, the word hitting him like a stone. He couldn't form a response. He just stood there, exposed and trembling. I am here to tell you that you are looking at the wrong door, the man continued, his gaze intense. The power of a quirk is the power of the body. It is impressive, certainly, but it is a mere fraction of what a human being is capable of. There are other kinds of power. Older kinds. Power that comes not from the flesh, but from the mind. Not from genetics, but from the spirit. He paused, letting his words sink in. Izuku's head was swimming. This was either a very elaborate prank, a hallucination brought on by emotional trauma, or something far, far stranger. My name is Dr. Stephen Strange, the man said, a faint, wry smile touching his lips. And I am what my order calls a master of the mystic arts. Mystic arts? Izuku whispered, the term feeling foreign and ridiculous on his tongue. You mean, like stage magic? Illusions? A quirk that creates illusions is still a quirk. It bends light, or manipulates the mind through psionic means, Strange corrected him smoothly. I am talking about the art of shaping reality itself, of drawing power from other dimensions to cast spells, to conjure shields, to open gateways to anywhere in this world, or any other. It is the power that comes from a simple, fundamental truth. The universe is only what your mind perceives it to be. Change your mind, and you change the universe. It was too much. Izuku's brain, which thrived on logic, on data, on observable phenomena, was rejecting it outright. That's impossible. That violates the laws of physics, the conservation of energy, thermodynamics. He started muttering, his go-to defense mechanism. To create something from nothing requires an equivalent exchange of mass energy, and drawing from other dimensions is a theoretical concept with no empirical evidence. It would require exotic matter or negative energy densities to stabilize a wormhole and yet, Strange said, cutting through his rambling with an air of immense patience, here I am. He unclasped his hands. He looked at the railing beside Izuku, the section that All Might's landing had bent and warped, the metal twisted into an ugly, unnatural shape. Your idol did this, I believe, Strange said. He lifted a hand, his fingers held in a peculiar, deliberate pose. He made no sound. He simply focused. Izuku watched, breathless, as the bent metal began to glow with a faint, green light. It shimmered like a heat haze. Then, with a soft, resonant groan, the warped steel began to move. It untwisted itself, the dent smoothing out, the paint reapplying itself from nowhere. In the space of 5 seconds, the railing was pristine, as if it had never been damaged. Not a scratch, not a mark remained. Izuku's jaw dropped. His muttering died in his throat. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the railing. It was solid. Cool. Real. How? I simply persuaded the universe that it was never broken, Strange said simply. He then looked at Izuku's scorched notebook, still clutched in his hand. You have a great mind, Izuku Midoriya. Analytical, inquisitive. You try to deconstruct the world to understand it. That is a vital skill. But you must learn that some things cannot be deconstructed. They must be accepted. He flicked his wrist, and a construct of golden light flickered into existence between them. It was a perfect, three-dimensional, moving image of the drawing on the first page of Izuku's notebook, a child's crayon sketch of All Might, smiling his signature smile. The light figure gave a little wave. Izuku gasped and stumbled back, clutching the notebook to his chest. He had pulled that from his mind. He had reached into his memories and pulled it out. This is the power I speak of, Strange continued, letting the light figure dissipate into harmless sparks. It requires no special DNA. It requires no physical mutation. It requires two things that you possess in abundance, a formidable intellect, and an indomitable will. He took a final step, closing the distance between them until he was only a few feet away. His expression was no longer just curious. It was serious, weighty. It was the look of a recruiter, a teacher, a master searching for an apprentice. The man you hero worship told you to be realistic. I am offering you an alternative. I am offering you the impossible, Strange said, his voice low and compelling. I can teach you. I can give you the tools to become 100 times more than the heroes of your world. Not to punch villains through buildings, but to rewrite the laws of physics around them. To defend not just your city, but your entire reality from threats you cannot begin to imagine. He extended a hand. It was not a handshake, but an open invitation. I am offering you a path to becoming a hero, Izuku Midoriya. It will not be the path you dreamed of. It will be harder, stranger, and more dangerous than you can possibly fathom. But it will be your path. The choice is yours. Izuku stared at the outstretched hand, then at the man's piercing eyes. His mind was a battlefield. One side, the logical side, screamed that this was insane. A trick. A dream. He should run. He should go home, cry into his pillow, and wake up tomorrow to his bleak, quirkless life. But the other side of him, the part that had stood on the edge of the roof minutes ago, that part knew he had nothing left to lose. His dream was dead. His idol had rejected him. His future was a long, gray, empty road. And here, standing in front of him, was a man offering him a door. A door to something so far beyond his wildest dreams that it looped all the way back around to being a possibility. He thought of the sludge villain. He thought of Bakugo's terrified eyes. He thought of the feeling of utter, complete helplessness. Whatever this magic was, it was real. He had seen it. It was power, and power, in the right hands, could save people. Tears welled in his eyes again, but these were not tears of despair. They were tears of a fragile, terrifying, overwhelming hope. The kind of hope that feels like it could either save you or shatter you completely. He looked down at his own trembling hands, then back at Strange. His voice, when it came, was a raw, broken whisper. Can someone like me, a Deku, can I really? There is no someone like you, Strange said, his voice softening with a flicker of empathy. There is only you. Your will. Your mind. The rest is just practice. I cannot promise you that you will succeed. I can only promise you the chance. The rest is up to you. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Slowly, deliberately, Izuku raised his hand. He wiped the tears from his cheek with his sleeve. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the city air filling his lungs one last time. He looked past Strange, at the skyline of the city he had always dreamed of protecting. Then he looked at Dr. Strange, the impossible man offering him an impossible future, and he nodded. I'll do it, Izuku said, his voice gaining a sliver of its old determination. Please. Teach me. A genuine, rare smile touched Dr. Strange's lips. A wise choice. He turned, and with another circular motion of his sling ring, the fiery portal ripped open the air once more. This time, the view through it was different. It showed a vast, open-air courtyard surrounded by ancient, Himalayan-style architecture, where dozens of figures in similar robes were training, sparring with glowing whips and shields of golden energy. The sky above was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The air looked clean, pure. It was a world away. The path begins now, Strange said, gesturing toward the portal. There is no turning back. It will demand everything you have. Izuku Midoriya stood at the precipice of two worlds. Behind him was a life of quiet desperation, of broken dreams and the label quirkless. Ahead of him was a gateway to utter madness, to impossible power, and to a new kind of hope. He clutched his notebook, his first grimoire, to his chest, took one last look at the life he was leaving behind, and walked through the open door of golden sparks, leaving the lonely rooftop and the city of his birth for a universe far wider than he had ever imagined. The portal snapped shut behind him, leaving the rooftop empty, the only evidence of the monumental event a faint, lingering scent of ozone and the impossible perfection of a once-bent railing. The world kept turning, completely unaware that it had just gained a new, and very different, future hero. The last thing Izuku Midoriya felt was the familiar, grimy concrete of the Muzurafu rooftop under the worn soles of his red sneakers. The last thing he smelled was the damp, metallic tang of an oncoming storm over the city he called home. The last thing he saw was the life that had been irrevocably shattered. The first thing he experienced of his new reality was a sensory assault. The air that hit his face was thin and cold, so crisp and clean it felt like inhaling ice. It carried scents he couldn't name, a dry, spicy aroma like ancient paper and sun-baked stone, the subtle perfume of exotic incense, and a clean, high-altitude sharpness that spoke of mountains and snow. The oppressive humidity of Japan was gone, replaced by a climate that felt sacred and severe. He blinked, his eyes watering from the sudden shift in light. He was standing in a vast, open-air courtyard. The sky above was a shade of deep, impossible blue, the sun brilliant and unfiltered. He was surrounded by architecture that seemed torn from a history book he'd never read. Intricately carved wooden balconies overhung stone archways. The roofs were layered and curved, tiled in dark slate, with dragons and mythical beasts perched on the corners, their stone eyes staring out at the towering, snow-capped peaks that clawed at the sky in the distance. The Himalayas. He was actually in the Himalayas. Dozens of people milled about the courtyard, all dressed in varying styles of layered robes, some in the same deep blue as Doctor Strange, others in shades of ochre, crimson, and forest green. They moved with a quiet, focused purpose. In one corner, a group practiced slow, flowing katas, their hands tracing patterns of light in the air. In another, two sorcerers sparred, their movements a dizzying dance of parries and dodges as they wielded crackling, golden whips of pure energy. Izuku's mind, the frantic, analytical engine that had been his only tool for so long, sputtered and stalled. It was like trying to analyze an earthquake while being caught in it. This wasn't a quirk. Quirks were a part of his world's science, an extension of biology. This felt like he'd torn a page out of his science textbook and replaced it with one from a fantasy novel. "Welcome," Dr. Strange's voice cut through his awestruck paralysis, "to Kamartaj." Izuku jumped, turning to find the Sorcerer Supreme watching him, an unreadable expression on his face. The cloak of levitation settled on his shoulders as if it were sighing in contentment. "This is one of our primary training sanctuaries," Strange explained, beginning to walk. Izuku, clutching his notebook like a life raft, scrambled to follow. Here, apprentices from all over the world, and sometimes from worlds beyond, learned to harness the foundational principles of the mystic arts. They passed the group sitting in a circle on the cold stones, their eyes closed in meditation. As Izuku watched, small, fist-sized balls of light flickered into existence, hovering over each of their open palms, all warred with a familiar, sinking feeling in his stomach. The ease with which they did it, the casual display of power, it reminded him of his first day of kindergarten, when all the other children were showing off their new quirks. "You seem overwhelmed," Strange observed, not breaking his stride. "It's a lot," Izuku squeaked, his voice barely a whisper. He felt small, out of place, a fraud. He was Deku, the quirkless kid. What was he doing here? He'd made a mistake. This was a place for special people, and he was the definition of ordinary. "Good," Strange said bluntly. "The first step to true learning is the acceptance of your own ignorance. Your world has taught you a set of rules. Here you must unlearn them. Forget physics, forget biology, forget what you think is possible. Your reality is a single page in an infinite library. I am about to hand you the card catalog." They entered a long, echoing corridor. The walls were lined not with paint or wallpaper, but with shelves carved directly into the stone, holding countless scrolls, leather-bound tomes, and strange, intricate artifacts that seemed to hum with a quiet energy. Light came not from bulbs, but from glowing crystals embedded in the ceiling, casting a warm, steady glow. Strange stopped before a simple wooden door. This will be your room. Training begins at sunrise. Meditation is followed by physical conditioning, then rudimentary spell work and study. Meals are communal. Curfew is absolute. Do you have any questions? Izuku's mind was a supernova of questions, but they were all tangled up in a knot of fear and awe. He managed to shake his head, feeling mute. Excellent, Strange said, though he didn't look particularly pleased. He looked like a surgeon who had just laid out his tools. Get some rest, Izuku Midoriya. Tomorrow, your education begins. With that, he turned and strode away down the hall, his red cloak sweeping behind him, leaving Izuku alone in the silent, humming corridor. With a trembling hand, Izuku pushed open the door to his new life. The room was Spartan. A simple straw mat on a low wooden frame served as a bed. There was a small desk, a stool, and a basin of water. A single window, covered by a rice paper screen, looked out onto the jagged, intimidating peaks of the mountains. It was more like a monk's cell than a bedroom. He placed his precious notebook on the desk. It looked absurdly out of place, a piece of 21st century Japanese mass production in a place that felt timeless. He sat on the edge of the bed, the straw rustling beneath him. The silence was absolute. No traffic, no shouting neighbors, no distant hero fights. Just the whisper of the high-altitude wind. He was alone, truly, utterly alone. The adrenaline and shock of the last hour began to fade, leaving behind the cold, hard bedrock of his situation. He had abandoned his life, his mother. A fresh wave of panic seized him. His mom. He hadn't even left a note. She would be worried sick. He had just vanished. He jumped up, his heart hammering, ready to run out and find Strange, to beg him to let him go back for just a minute. But he stopped, his hand on the door. What would he even say? Sorry, Mom, I've run away to a magical temple in the Himalayas to learn sorcery because All Might told me I couldn't be a hero. She would think he'd lost his mind. Strange had said there was no turning back. This was the price. The first of many, he suspected. With a heavy, leaden heart, he slid to the floor, curling into a ball. For the second time that day, Izuku Midoriya cried. But this time, it was not for a dream that had died, but for a life he had just sacrificed. The next morning began before the sun. A resonant chime echoed through Kamartaj, pulling Izuku from a restless, dream-filled sleep. He dressed quickly in the simple, loose-fitting cotton robes that had been left for him. They felt strange and scratchy against his skin, and followed the flow of other apprentices back to the main courtyard. The air was bitingly cold. Dr. Strange stood in the center of the yard, hands clasped behind his back. He addressed the assembled students, his voice carrying effortlessly in the thin air. The mystic arts are not a weapon. They are a tool. The hand that wields the tool determines its purpose. To shape reality, you must first master your own. Your mind is the source. Your will is the amplifier. An undisciplined mind is a cracked lens, distorting the power it seeks to channel. Therefore, your first lesson is always the same: silence. He gestured for them all to sit. Meditate. Find the center of your being. Still the tempest of your thoughts. Let go of your ego, your fears, your attachments. Become a calm sea upon which the universe can be reflected. Izuku sat, tucking his legs into a clumsy lotus position. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, trying to emulate the serene expressions of the apprentices around him. Okay. Meditate. I can do this. Just be quiet. Empty my mind. His mind immediately obliged by becoming the busiest, noisiest place in the known universe. Am I doing this right? My back hurts. Should it hurt? That guy next to me isn't moving at all. He must be really good at this. Is Strange Sensei watching me? He probably thinks I'm a total failure already. I haven't even cast a spell and I'm failing. I wonder what Mom is doing right now. She's probably calling the police. I should have left a note. What if a villain attacks her? There are heroes, but what if they're not fast enough? What if the sludge villain incident happens again? Kaken. I hope he's okay. He was so angry. He's always angry, but that was different. He was scared. Does being a hero mean you're never scared? All Might said he's always scared. So it's okay to be scared. But I'm not just scared, I'm useless. No, Strange Sensei said I wasn't. He said I have a strong will, but my will feels pretty shaky right now. I can't even sit still. My foot is falling asleep. Is that supposed to happen? I wonder what the energy source for their spells is. Strange Sensei mentioned other dimensions. Is it like a battery? Do you have to recharge? Or is it a constant flow? Maybe it's tied to ambient cosmic radiation. Midoriya. Izuku's eyes snapped open. Strange was standing over him, his expression one of mild exasperation. You are not meditating, he stated. You are worrying with your eyes closed. Your mind is a frantic storm. I can practically hear your thoughts from here. They are loud, and frankly, quite repetitive. Let go. I'm trying. Izuku blurted out, his face flushing with shame. Trying is a function of the ego. It implies effort, and a potential for failure. Do not try. Simply, be, Strange instructed. The body is a vessel. The mind an anchor. You are tethered to it. I'm going to demonstrate how to loosen the rope. He gestured for Izuku to stand and follow him to a quieter, more secluded part of the courtyard. Lie down, he commanded. Izuku obeyed, lying flat on his back on the cold stones, staring up at the blue sky. Strange knelt beside him. I am going to give you a gentle push, he said. Do not fight it. Observe. Before Izuku could ask what he meant, Strange placed 2 fingers on his forehead. Your body is not you. Your mind is not you. You are the consciousness that perceives them both. He pushed, not physically, but with a surge of something else. The world tilted and went sideways. There was a sensation of profound, jarring vertigo, a feeling of being pulled through himself. For a split second, he felt a cold, terrifying lightness. And then, he was floating. He looked down and screamed, a silent, soundless scream, because his mouth wasn't moving. Below him, lying on the stone floor, was his own body. His eyes were closed, his mouth slightly agape, a faint look of surprise on his face. He looked small, pathetic, and deeply, deeply asleep. What? He thought, and the thought was his voice. He looked at his hands. They were a ghostly, translucent blue-white, shimmering with a faint light. He was an apparition. A ghost. Welcome to the astral plane, Strange's voice echoed around him, seeming to come from everywhere at once. He turned and saw Strange's own astral form floating calmly beside him, identical to his physical body but for the same ethereal glow. This is your astral form. Your spirit. Your consciousness, unshackled from its physical housing. Izuku frantically tried to move, to get back into his body. He felt a powerful, irresistible pull, a physical drag. Looking down, he saw it, a shimmering, silver cord of light extending from the center of his astral chest down to his physical form. It was taut, straining. And it felt heavy, heavy with anxiety, with self-doubt, with fear. You feel that? Strange asked, his astral gaze fixed on the cord. That is your tether. For most, it is a simple connection. For you, it is an anchor chain. It is forged from every moment you were told you were not good enough. Every time you believed it. Your doubt has weight, Izuku Midoriya. In this realm, it is a literal gravity, pulling you back to the prison of your perceived limitations. To master the arts, you must learn to lighten that chain. Strange gestured, and the astral world around them seemed to ripple. He showed Izuku the other meditating students. Their silver cords were lax, shimmering gently. Their astral forms hovered peacefully just above their bodies. They have let go, Strange explained. You are clinging on for dear life. You cannot soar if you refuse to let go of the ground. The demonstration was over as quickly as it began. Strange's astral form dissipated, and Izuku felt an almighty yank. The world compressed into a tunnel of light, and he slammed back into his body with a jolt that felt like being tasered. He gasped, taking in a huge, shuddering breath, the cold air burning his lungs. He was back in his own skin, the weight and solidity of it almost suffocating. He sat up, trembling, his heart racing. That, Strange said, his physical form looking down at him impassively, is the lock you must learn to pick. Everything else is secondary. practice, he walked away, leaving Izuku alone and shivering. The memory of that ghostly chord burned into his mind. Days bled into one another. The routine was brutal and uncompromising. Izuku's body, already conditioned from his 10 months of aim-to-pass training, adapted well to the physical regimen of martial arts and endurance exercises. He wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but his work ethic was second to none. The other apprentices, who had initially been wary of the strange, mumbling boy from Japan, began to treat him with a grudging respect for his sheer tenacity. But the mental aspect, he was failing. Utterly. Every meditation session was a battle against the frantic hurricane of his own mind. Every attempt to feel the flow of energy in the universe was met with a wall of intellectual skepticism. The other apprentices were moving on. They were learning to conjure simple shields of light, to trace basic runes in the air. Izuku couldn't even manage the first step. He was falling behind. The feeling was horribly, sickeningly familiar. He was Deku all over again, the one kid in a world of wonders who just couldn't do it. His doubt-forged anchor felt heavier than ever. One afternoon, after a particularly humiliating session where he failed to even create a single spark while the student next to him, a stoic woman named Jia, had effortlessly conjured a perfect, shimmering mandala shield, Izuku retreated to his room. He was close to breaking. The hope that had burned so brightly on that rooftop was dwindling to a flickering ember. He sat at his desk, staring at his notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. It was a relic of a dead dream. A useless artifact. He was about to shove it under his bed, to hide the evidence of his foolishness, when his fingers brushed against All Might's signature. "You need to be realistic, kid," strange words came back to him. "Forget what you think is possible." What if he was approaching this all wrong? He was trying to be like them, to feel and believe and let go. But that wasn't him. He wasn't a serene monk. He was an analyst, a muttering, overthinking, obsessive note-taker. All his life, when faced with something he didn't understand, he didn't just accept it. He deconstructed it. He took notes. An idea, tentative and strange, began to form in his mind. He couldn't stop his brain from analyzing. So what if? He leaned into it. He flipped open the notebook to a fresh page. At the top, he hesitated, then crossed out the word future. With a decisive stroke of his pen, he wrote a new title, Grimoire for Hero Analysis, number 13. He felt a spark, not of magic, but of his old self. He grabbed his pen and snuck back out, finding a secluded spot on a balcony overlooking the training yard. He began to watch, but this time, he wasn't watching with envy. He was watching with purpose. He focused on Jia as she practiced her shield spell. His pen flew across the page, his familiar, frantic muttering returning in a low whisper. Spell, basic Eldritch Shield. Somatic component, circular motion with the dominant hand counterclockwise. Fingers held in a specific mudra, index and middle fingers extended, others curled. Motion must be smooth, constant velocity. Verbal component, none observed. Purely concentration-based. Energy manifestation, orange-gold sparks coalesce from a central point, expanding outwards. Shape is concave, diameter directly proportional to the radius of the arm motion. Question, energy source? Strange Sensei mentioned extra-dimensional sourcing. Is the gesture an antenna to tune into a specific dimensional frequency? Or is it a nozzle to shape energy already present in the user? Must ask. The shield appears to absorb kinetic energy. Observed it deflecting a practice staff. No recoil on the user's arm. Does it convert kinetic to thermal? Or dissipate it into the source dimension? Hypothesis. The shield is a localized, temporary distortion of physical law, maintained by the user's focus. He spent the rest of the day like this, hiding and observing. He filled pages with diagrams of hand gestures, theories on energy channeling, and frantic questions. He broke down the movements of the sling ring, noting the precise speed and arc required to open a portal. He analyzed the breathing patterns of the meditating masters, trying to find a correlation between respiratory rate and energy output. He was trying to do the one thing Strange had told him not to. He was trying to put the infinite in a box. But it was the only thing that made him feel like he had any control at all. That evening, Strange found him. Izuku was sitting on the floor of a dusty, forgotten library alcove, surrounded by his scattered notebook pages, muttering to himself as he drew a complex diagram of what he theorized was the energy circuit of a simple light spell. Midoriya, Strange's voice echoed in the alcove. Izuku yelped and scrambled to his feet, trying to hide the pages. Sensei. I was just studying. Strange's eyes fell upon the notebook page on the floor. He picked it up, his eyebrow raising as he scanned Izuku's frantic scrawl. He read the title. Theoretical Framework for Minor Cantrip The Light of Firin. Below were bullet points. Optimal breathing pattern, focal point visualization, somatic symbology. What is this? Strange asked, his voice flat. It's my notes, Izuku stammered, bracing for a lecture. I know you said to let go, to not think, but I can't. My brain, it doesn't turn off. So I thought, if I can't turn it off, maybe I can give it a job to do. I'm trying to understand the system. The mechanics of it. Strange looked from the page to Izuku, then back to the page. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. You are treating the mystic arts like a high school physics problem. You are trying to quantify the unquantifiable. You are attempting to photograph the wind. Magic is not a machine, boy. It is an art. It is a dance. I know, Izuku said, desperation making him bolder. But I can't dance if I don't know the steps. Everyone else hears the music, but I can't. All I can do is watch their feet and write down the movements, and hope I can copy them. He gestured to his notes, his eyes shining with a frantic, pleading light. This is how I learn. This is the only way I know how. By breaking it down until I see the pattern. Please, don't take my notebook away. Strange was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the intricate diagrams. He had seen thousands of students over the years. Some were gifted, some were disciplined, some were arrogant, but he had never seen this. He had never seen a student try to reverse engineer the very source code of magic with a ballpoint pen and a spiral-bound notebook. It was absurd. It was audacious. And it was, in its own way, brilliant. The surgeon in him, the man of science he once was, recognized the methodology. This boy couldn't quiet his analytical mind, so he was trying to use it as his primary tool. He was creating a conscious, logical pathway to an act that should be intuitive and subconscious. He was building a bridge of pure logic over a chasm that was meant to be crossed with a leap of faith. Strange handed the page back to Izuku. The annoyance on his face had been replaced by a deep, thoughtful curiosity. The dance is still the goal, Midoriya, he said, his tone shifting. But, very well. Let us see if your sheet music can teach you how to hear the melody. Show me. He led Izuku to an empty training hall and tossed him a sling ring. It felt heavy and cool in Izuku's palm. You have been observing. You have been analyzing. You have filled your grimoire. Apply your theory. Open a portal. Izuku's heart hammered. This was it. The test. He looked at the sling ring, then at his own notes, which he clutched in his other hand. He took a deep breath, not to clear his mind, but to steady his nerves. Okay. Theory into practice. My notes say the initial gesture must be precise. A fluid, circular motion. Anti-clockwise for short-range translocation. He slipped the ring onto the fingers of his left hand. He closed his eyes for a second, not to meditate, but to visualize. He didn't picture a vague destination. He pictured the wall on the other side of the room, analyzing its texture, the cracks in the stone, the way the light hit it. He built a perfect, high-resolution image of it in his mind. A target. Procedure, not belief, he told himself, his new mantra. Just follow the steps. He raised his hand. He mimicked the exact motion he had seen Jia and the others perform hundreds of times, a motion he had deconstructed and diagrammed from 3 different angles in his notebook. His arm moved in a smooth circle. His fingers held the specific pose. He focused all his intent, all his analytical power, on that single point on the far wall. He wasn't feeling the universe. He was executing a complex equation with his body and mind. For a moment, nothing happened. The familiar, cold dread began to pool in his stomach. Failure. Again. But then, he felt a strange tingle in his fingertips. A single, defiant orange spark sputtered into existence in front of him. It was tiny, no bigger than a firefly, and it sizzled out almost instantly with a pathetic fizz. It was the most beautiful thing Izuku Midoriya had ever seen. He stared at the empty air where it had been, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open. It wasn't a portal. It wasn't a shield. It was barely anything. But it was something. It was a result. Proof of concept. He had followed his own instructions, and reality had, for a fraction of a second, bent to his will. A wide, trembling, ecstatic grin spread across his face. I did it, he whispered, looking at Strange with triumphant, tear-filled eyes. It worked. Dr. Strange did not clap. He did not offer effusive praise. He simply stood there, his arms crossed, watching the boy who was staring at his hand as if he had just discovered fire. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of the Sorcerer Supreme's mouth. He had given the boy a key and told him to find the right door. The boy couldn't find it. So, with nothing but a pen, paper, and a will of pure, analytical iron, he had started to build his own. This path would be strange. It would be unconventional. But it would be uniquely Izuku Midoriya's. And for a student of the mystic arts, there was no better foundation than that. The sorcerer's will had found its way. The single, sputtering spark was not a floodgate opening, but a crack in the dam. It was proof that the dam could, in fact, be broken. For Izuku Midoriya, that was all the encouragement he needed. The following weeks saw a transformation. The despair that had clung to him like a shroud was burned away by the heat of a new, ferocious obsession. He was no longer just a student. He was a researcher, a pioneer in a field of one. His days took on a new, grueling rhythm. Before sunrise, he was in the courtyard, not meditating in the traditional sense, but practicing what he called focal point stabilization. He would sit for hours, his notebook open beside him, trying to hold a single, tiny spark in existence for as long as possible. He meticulously logged his progress. Day 12, maintain single spark, 3.7 seconds. Cause of failure, intrusive thought regarding lunch. Note, mental noise creates energy instability. Hypothesis, the Kamsi Strange Sensei described is not about emptiness, but about reducing signal interference. But Strange had been clear. A sorcerer's mind was only one part of the Trinity. A brilliant mind in a weak body is a lantern in a cracked jar. Strange told him one afternoon, interrupting Izuku's frantic note-taking. The energies you seek to command are violent, primal forces. They flow through you. If the conduit is weak, it will shatter. Your physical conditioning has been adequate. Now, it becomes paramount. This was territory Izuku understood. This was the language of his aim-to-pass training plan, a gospel of sweat and aching muscles he had followed religiously for 10 months on the shores of Dagoba Municipal Beach. The physical training at Kamartage intensified tenfold. It was no longer just about endurance and basic martial arts. It was about forging the body into a weapon that could complement the mind's power. He was paired with a stern, silent master named Hammer, a man whose bald head was covered in intricate tattoos and whose forearms were as thick as Izuku's thighs. Hammer did not believe in letting go or finding one's center. He believed in muscle failure and perfect form. Izuku was put through brutal drills, staff fighting, hand-to-hand combat based on a dozen different martial arts, and grueling conditioning exercises that left him gasping for air in the thin mountain atmosphere. He would spend his mornings tracing glowing runes that fizzled out half-formed, his afternoons being thrown onto hard stone mats by Hammer, and his nights studying ancient texts, with the aid of a translation charm Strange had provided, and adding to his own personal grimoire. His body became a landscape of aches and bruises, but his spirit soared. Every sore muscle was a testament to progress. Every failed spell was just another data point. One evening, Strange led him to a different kind of training ground, a vast, circular chamber deep within the mountain. The walls were smooth, dark obsidian, and the floor was emblazoned with a massive, glowing seal of the Vishanti. "You have learned to create a spark," Strange announced, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Now you will learn to give it form. To shape your will into a tangible object. A sorcerer's first and most important construct is the shield," he demonstrated. With a flick of his wrist, a perfect, circular shield of golden, Interlocking mandalas bloomed into existence on his forearm. It hummed with contained power. The shield is an extension of your will to protect. It is a statement, you shall not pass. It must be absolute. Unyielding. Now you, Izuku took a deep breath. He had been practicing this. He had filled pages with diagrams of the shield's fractal geometry. He knew the theory. He mimicked the gesture, focused his mind, and pushed his will outward. A small, wobbly disk of orange light appeared on his arm. It looked less like a shield and more like a misshapen, glowing dinner plate. It was translucent and flickered nervously, as if it were afraid of its own existence. It is tentative, Strange observed, his tone unimpressed. It reflects the user. You are hesitant. You are afraid to commit. A shield born of doubt is no shield at all. It is a suggestion of a shield. To prove his point, Strange conjured a small, simple dart of energy and flicked it at Izuku. The instant the dart touched the glowing plate, Izuku's construct shattered into 1,000 fading sparks with a sound like tinkling glass. The energy dart continued, unabated, and struck him in the chest. It didn't pierce his skin, but it felt like being punched by a fist made of static electricity. He yelped and stumbled backward, clutching his chest. Your will is not strong enough, Strange stated, his face a mask of stern disappointment. Your analysis has given you the blueprint, but you lack the conviction to pour the foundation. You are still the boy on the rooftop who believes he is not good enough. As long as you believe that, your every shield will be made of glass. The criticism stung, sharp and deep, because Izuku knew it was true. In the analytical part of his brain, he was confident. He could break down the mechanics of a spell better than anyone. But deep down, in the core of his being where true will resided, the voice of Deku still whispered. The voice that said you're a fake. You don't belong here. You're just pretending. The next few days were a frustrating cycle of failure. He would spend hours in the obsidian chamber, his arm aching, his mind exhausted. He would conjure his pathetic, shimmering shield, and Strange, or another senior sorcerer, would shatter it with a casual gesture. Each failure was another crack in his carefully constructed confidence. His grimoire, once a source of pride, now felt like a testament to his own inadequacy. It was full of perfect theories that he was personally incapable of executing. He tried everything. He meditated on the concept of protection. He drew shields over and over again in his notebook. He even tried whispering confidence-boosting mantras to himself, feeling utterly ridiculous. Nothing worked. The shield would form, weak and trembling, and it would shatter. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal session that left him mentally and emotionally drained, Strange dismissed him with a curt, "Your doubt is a stubborn weed, Midoriya. Go and consider why you are so determined to fail." Izuku trudged out of the training chamber, his shoulders slumped. He felt hollowed out. He had come so far, only to hit a wall that was, quite literally, himself. He wandered aimlessly through the corridors of Camartage, his feet eventually carrying him to the Grand Library. It was a place of quiet reverence, filled with the wisdom of millennia. He usually came here to study, but today, he just needed a place to hide. He found a secluded corner and slumped to the floor, pulling his knees to his chest. He was a failure. Strange had made a mistake in choosing him. He should have picked someone stronger, someone more confident, someone like Kaken. The thought of Bakugo brought a fresh wave of shame. He pictured his childhood friend, no, his tormentor, with his explosive power, his overwhelming, arrogant confidence. Bakugo never doubted himself. He would probably be conjuring shields the size of buildings by now. But as he thought of Bakugo, another image surfaced. An image from a few months ago, from a day that felt like a lifetime ago. The sludge villain. He remembered the look in Bakugo's eyes. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't anger. It was terror. Pure, undiluted terror. For all his power, for all his confidence, Bakugo had been helpless. He had been drowning. And what had Izuku felt in that moment, watching from the sidelines? Helplessness. Despair. And an overwhelming, all-consuming need to save him. His mind began to race, not with analysis, but with memory. He didn't just remember wanting to save Bakugo. He remembered every time he'd ever felt that pull. He remembered wanting to protect his mother from his father's angry shouting when he was a small child. He remembered standing up to Bakugo and his friends to protect another crying kid in the sandbox, getting beaten up for his troubles. And most vividly, he remembered the image that had been his northern star for his entire life. The image from the viral video. All Might, standing in the rubble of a disaster zone, a dozen people cradled in his powerful arms. He was laughing, his body a living shield against the chaos. It's fine now. Why? Because I am here. That image, it wasn't just a symbol of power. It was a symbol of absolute, unwavering protection. All Might's smile wasn't just for the cameras. It was a shield for the heart. It was a promise. When All Might was there, everything was safe. The sheer idea of him was a shield. Something clicked in Izuku's mind. A profound, fundamental realization. Strange had told him his shield was a reflection of his will to protect. But Izuku had been trying to manifest his own will, a will he still believed was weak and tainted by doubt. He had been trying to protect himself, but his desire to protect others, that was different. That desire had no doubt. It had no hesitation. It was the purest, strongest thing about him. It was the force that had made him run toward the sludge villain when pro-heroes stood frozen. It was the energy that had resonated across dimensions and summoned the Sorcerer Supreme to his rooftop. He had been trying to build a shield out of his own flawed materials. What if he built it out of his admiration for the perfect shield? What if he channeled not his own will to protect, but the very concept of All Might's protection? He shot to his feet, a fire in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He ran from the library, his footsteps echoing in the silent halls. He didn't go to the obsidian chamber. He burst out into the main courtyard, where several apprentices, including Jia, were practicing. "Spar with me," he said to her, his voice breathless but firm. Jia, who had witnessed his repeated failures, looked at him with a mixture of pity and surprise. "Izuku, perhaps you should rest. Please," he insisted, his gaze intense. "I need this." She looked at him, saw the desperate conviction in his eyes, and shrugged. "Very well. But do not be discouraged when..." She trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. They took their positions in the center of the courtyard. The other apprentices stopped their own practice to watch what they assumed would be another quick, pathetic failure. Jia took her stance. "Ready?" Izuku didn't answer. He closed his eyes. He didn't try to empty his mind. He did the opposite. He filled it. He filled it with the image of All Might, laughing in the face of disaster. He pictured the powerful arms, the broad chest, the iconic V-shaped hair. He felt the absolute certainty, the unshakable safety that image represented. He wasn't Izuku Midoriya, the doubtful apprentice. He was a vessel for that ideal. He was channeling the concept of the symbol of peace. His own will was a flickering candle. But his admiration for All Might? That was a supernova. He opened his eyes. They were burning with a new light. "Ready." Jia sighed and made a sharp, cutting motion with her hand. A whip of golden energy, thick and crackling, flew from her fingertips, lashing through the air toward Izuku's chest. It was a standard training attack, fast and powerful. This time, Izuku didn't just raise his arm. He planted his feet, bent his knees, and threw his arm forward in a blocking motion that was a perfect, unconscious imitation of All Might shielding a civilian. He poured every ounce of his admiration, every memory of his hero, every drop of his selfless desire to save others into the spell. He didn't just will a shield into existence. He commanded it. Vwum! The sound was not the gentle tinkle of shattering glass. It was a deep, resonant hum, like a great bell being struck. An enormous shield of eldritch magic erupted from his arm. It wasn't the simple, translucent disk he had been trying to create. This was a work of art. It was vast, at least 6 feet across, composed of intricate, overlapping layers of golden-orange mandalas that spun and whirred like the gears of a divine watch. At its center, 2 V-shaped patterns, like rabbit ears or a victor's peace sign, glowed with a brighter, more intense light, an unconscious tribute to his idol. It was massive, complex, and radiated an aura of absolute, immovable power. Jia's energy whip struck the shield. There was no impact. No sound. The whip simply dissolved against the shield's surface, its energy absorbed and utterly negated. The shield didn't even flicker. The courtyard fell silent. Everyone stared, their mouths agape. Jiao stood frozen, her hands still outstretched, her eyes wide with disbelief. Hammer, who had been observing from the sidelines, stopped chewing on the piece of straw in his mouth. Izuku stared at the magnificent construct attached to his arm. It felt right. It felt like an extension of his soul in a way the smaller shields never had. It was humming with power, but it felt light, effortless to maintain. He hadn't created it from his own meager well of confidence. He had created it from the boundless ocean of his heroic ideal. A slow, amazed smile spread across his face. He had found the key. He looked up and saw Dr. Strange standing in the archway of the main hall, watching him. The Sorcerer Supreme was not smiling, but there was a distinct look of approval, of vindication, in his eyes. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. That night, Izuku didn't study ancient texts. He sat at his desk and opened his grimoire to a new section. He titled it, Hero-Inspired Constructs, a Practical Application of Idealized Forms. His mind, now unlocked, exploded with possibilities. If he could create a shield based on his admiration for All Might, what else could he do? He was a walking encyclopedia of heroes. He had spent his entire life analyzing their powers, their gear, their fighting styles. That knowledge, which he had once thought useless, was now his greatest asset. It was a library of perfect forms, of heroic ideals, just waiting to be given magical substance. His pen flew across the page. He sketched out a new idea, a long, flexible, semi-sentient whip of eldritch energy. He diagrammed its movements, its ability to lengthen and constrict. He wasn't just inventing it. He was basing it on the countless hours he had spent watching videos of the underground hero, Eraserhead. He tried to capture the fluid, unpredictable nature of Aizawa's capture weapon. He called it the Eldritch Capture Scarf. He designed gauntlets. Not just magical armor, but constructs designed to absorb and redirect kinetic energy. He remembered a support company's prototype he'd read about in Hero Monthly magazine. He based his design on their theoretical schematics, imagining a magical version that could catch a punch and release the force in a controlled blast. He called them the Impact Recoil Gauntlets. His mind was on fire. He was no longer just copying the spells of Kamartaj. He was inventing his own. He was fusing the logic of his world, the science of support items, the tactics of pro-heroes, with the limitless potential of the mystic arts. He wasn't just learning magic, he was hybridizing it. The next day in training, when asked to conjure a simple magical weapon, Izuku didn't create a sword or a staff. After a few seconds of intense concentration, he manifested a long, glowing band of golden light that coiled around his shoulders and arms, its ends hovering in the air before him like curious serpents. Hammer raised an eyebrow. What is that? A capture weapon, Izuku explained, a newfound confidence in his voice. He practiced with it all day, learning to control its movements, to make it lash out, to wrap around training dummies, to act as a grappling hook. It was clumsy at first, but it was his. It was a piece of his own unique, analytical soul, given form. He had found his path. He wasn't a traditional sorcerer who drew power from quiet contemplation. He was something new. He was a hero analyst, a tactical nerd, a fanboy, and he would draw his power from the very heroes he admired, using their ideals as the blueprint for his own burgeoning might. He was forging a new kind of sorcery, one born not in the silent monasteries of the Himalayas, but in the loud, vibrant, quirk-filled streets of Japan. His grimoire was no longer just for analysis. It was becoming a book of creation. 6 months in Kamartaj felt like a lifetime. The Izuku Midoriya who had stepped through the portal was a ghost, a shed skin left behind on a rooftop in another world. The boy who now stood in the center of the obsidian training chamber was different. He was taller by a few inches, his frame lean but wiry, corded with the kind of hard-won muscle that comes from relentless discipline. The perpetual fear in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, analytical intensity. The hopeless slump in his shoulders was gone, his posture now straight and poised, ready to move in an instant. His grimoire was now a thick, dogged tome, nearly bursting with notes, diagrams, and theoretical spell frameworks. The Eldritch Capture Scarf was no longer a clumsy serpent, but a fluid extension of his will, lashing out with pinpoint accuracy. His impact Riku gauntlets could be manifested in a heartbeat, absorbing the full force of a blow from hammer, and leaving Izuku's arms steady. He hadn't mastered the mystic arts, not by a long shot. He was still a novice, a mere apprentice. But he was no longer helpless. He was no longer Deku. One crisp morning, Dr. Strange summoned him. They stood in the main hall, the oculus window casting a complex pattern of light on the floor. Your progress is unconventional, Strange began, his tone holding its usual cryptic neutrality. But it is undeniable. You have forged your own path, weaponizing your analytical mind in a way I have never witnessed. However, theory and practice within these walls are a controlled environment. A laboratory. He began to trace a circle in the air with his sling ring. Golden sparks showered the floor as a portal churned into existence. Through it, Izuku saw a sight that made his heart clench with a painful, nostalgic ache. A familiar, trash-strewn stretch of coastline under a gray, overcast sky. The sea breeze almost seemed to drift through the portal, carrying the scent of salt and decay. Dagoba Municipal Beach, Izuku breathed, his voice soft with awe and a sudden, sharp pang of homesickness. You have been disconnected from your world, from the reason you first sought this power, Strange continued, his expression serious. A sorcerer who forgets why they fight becomes a danger to themselves and others. It is time for a field test. It is time for you to remember what it is you are fighting for. Izuku's eyes widened. You're sending me back? Temporarily, Strange clarified. The flow of time between Kamartaj and your home dimension is not perfectly synchronous. By my calculations, less than an hour has passed in Muzidafa since your departure from that rooftop. This presents a unique opportunity. A knot of ice formed in Izuku's stomach. He knew what had been happening when he left. The sludge villain. Bakugo. You want me to intervene? Izuku asked, his voice trembling slightly. The idea was both terrifying and electrifying. I want you to observe, Strange corrected him sternly. You are not yet a hero. You are an apprentice. Your task is to reconnect with your purpose. Go to the beach. Clean it, as you once planned. It will be a form of active meditation. Ground yourself in your world again. But know this, his gaze hardened, becoming sharp as honed steel. The universe is presenting you with a crucible. The events you fled from are still unfolding. What you choose to do is your own decision. But remember the first rule of a sorcerer, do no harm. And the first rule of a hero, save those who need saving. Sometimes those two rules are in conflict. That is the burden you have chosen. Izuku's mind raced. He could save him. He could save Kaken. But he wasn't supposed to interfere. The paradox was a dizzying loop. He looked from the portal to Strange, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Your training has given you tools, Strange said, his voice a low murmur. Your grimoire has given you knowledge. Now we will see if you have the wisdom to use them. Go. With a nod that was far more confident than he felt, Izuku Midoriya stepped through the portal. The sensory shift was the reverse of his arrival at Kamartaj. The clean, thin mountain air was replaced by the thick, humid, salt-heavy atmosphere of the coast. The profound silence was shattered by the distant wail of sirens, the rumble of traffic, and the cries of seagulls. He was home. He stood on the sand, surrounded by mountains of rusting appliances, broken furniture, and discarded plastics. It was just as he remembered it. For a moment, he simply stood there, letting the feeling of his world wash over him. It felt small, mundane, and achingly precious after the cosmic grandeur of Kamartaj. Then, the urgency of the situation hit him. He turned and ran, his boots sinking into the sand. He scrambled up the concrete steps leading from the beach to the street, his breath misting in the cool air. The sirens were louder now, converging on a point just a few blocks away. The Takoba shopping arcade. He ran, his physically conditioned body moving faster and more efficiently than he ever could have before. He skidded around a corner and saw it. The scene was one of controlled chaos, just as he remembered from his previous, helpless perspective. But now, his eyes saw it differently. His mind, honed by months of analytical training, didn't just see a villain fight. It saw a tactical problem. The sludge villain was a swirling morass of green-brown filth, its form unstable and difficult to target. It had taken refuge in a narrow alleyway between a pachinko parlor and a convenience store, creating a bottleneck. Kamui Woods was on the scene, but his wooden limbs couldn't get a solid grip on the semi-liquid body. Death Arms was trying to clear civilians, his raw strength useless against the villain itself. Backdraft was struggling to contain the fires that were erupting from the explosions. Bakugo. Izuku pushed through the throng of onlookers, his shorter stature allowing him to weave through the crowd. He finally broke through to the front, near the police barricade, and his breath caught in his throat. There, at the heart of the disgusting, churning sludge, was Katsuki Bakugo. He was thrashing, fighting, his face a mask of rage and terror. His hands were free, and he was setting off explosions indiscriminately, trying to blast his way out. But each blast only served to ignite the flammable liquids in the alley, making the situation more dangerous for everyone. His defiant sparks were his only defense, but they were also his prison. The pro-heroes were shouting, their expressions grim. "I can't get a hold of him!" Kamui Woods yelled. "My punches just go right through." Death Arms roared in frustration. "We need someone with the right quirk. We have to wait." Waiting, Izuku thought, a cold fury rising in him. They're waiting while he suffocates. He saw the look in Bakugo's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen before, but now he understood it better. It was the terror of a powerful person realizing their power was useless. It was the ultimate loss of control. And in that moment, all the years of bullying, all the taunts of Deku, all the cruelty, it all melted away. All Izuku saw was a person who needed saving. He remembered Strange's words. "Observe. The choice is yours." His old self would have run in screaming, a reckless, suicidal charge. His new self did something different. He stepped back, melting into the shadows of the crowd, his mind a whirlwind of calculation. Problem: hostage situation, volatile environment. Target is non-solid and flammable. Primary objective: rescue the hostage. Secondary objectives: neutralize the threat, minimize collateral damage, avoid detection. He wasn't a pro-hero. He couldn't be seen. His appearance here, with powers no one had ever seen, would raise too many questions. He needed to be a ghost. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. He closed his eyes, his grimoire flashing through his mind. What tools did he have? A massive, flashy shield? No, too conspicuous. The capture scarf? Might work, but the villain was too amorphous. Portals? Risky. Too much potential for error. He needed subtlety. He needed spells that wouldn't look like spells. His eyes snapped open. He had an idea. It was a low-level set of cantrips, things he'd barely bothered to practice because they weren't flashy. Minor telekinesis. Simple binding runes. Atmospheric manipulation. Things a sorcerer used to tidy their room or light a candle. But here, in this chaotic environment, they could be invisible weapons. He found a spot behind a large news van, shielded from the view of the heroes and the crowd. He took a deep, calming breath, stilling his racing heart. This wasn't training. This was real. He extended a hand, palm open, towards the alleyway. He focused, not on the villain, but on the ground beneath it. He recalled a simple binding spell, one designed to reinforce the structure of an object. But instead of reinforcing, he visualized the opposite. He pictured the asphalt becoming slick, sticky. He channeled a tiny, precise thread of eldritch energy, not into a visible construct, but directly into the matter of the street. The effect was imperceptible to the naked eye. But the sludge villain felt it. The ground it was anchored to suddenly became a morass, like thick tar. Its movements, already clumsy, became sluggish. It struggled to maintain its form, its swirling becoming slower, more labored. Death Arms, seeing the change, shouted, "He seems to be slowing down." He didn't know why, but he saw an opening. Next, Izuku turned his attention to the fires. Bakugo's uncontrolled explosions were causing flames to lick up the side of the convenience store, dangerously close to a large propane tank display. Backdraft was doing his best, but he couldn't be everywhere at once. Izuku focused again. This was a more complex application, one he theorized but never attempted. He reached out with his mind, feeling the air in the alley. He didn't try to create water, he simply moved the oxygen. With a colossal act of mental will, he telekinetically pushed the oxygen-rich air away from the flames, creating a localized, temporary vacuum around the most dangerous fires. The flames sputtered. They shrank, turning from roaring orange to a weak blue flicker, starved of fuel. Backdraft stared in confusion. What the? It's like the fire's choking. He seized the opportunity, dousing the weakened flames with a powerful jet of water. Izuku was sweating now. The concentration was immense. He was a puppeteer pulling invisible strings, each action a delicate, draining exertion. Now for the civilians. The crowd was pressing forward, eager to see the fight. A panic surge caused the police barricade to wobble, and a large sign on the pachinko parlor, loosened by the vibrations of the explosions, creaked ominously. It was going to fall right where a group of teenagers were standing, their phones out, recording. Izuku didn't have time for subtlety. He needed to act now. He thrust his hand forward, palm flat. A wave of pure, invisible kinetic force, a telekinetic shove, erupted from his position. It wasn't a blast. It was a powerful, silent gust of wind. The teenagers stumbled backward as if shoved by a giant hand. Whoa! What was that? One of them yelled. They were pushed back a good 10 feet, grumbling and confused. A second later, the heavy sign crashed to the ground right where they had been standing, shattering into a spray of plastic and metal. They stared, pale-faced and silent, at the spot where they would have been crushed. Izuku leaned against the news van, panting. He had done it. He had altered the battlefield, saved lives, and no one was the wiser. They would chalk it up to strange winds, the villain weakening, lucky breaks. His intervention was a ghost in the machine. But the main problem remained. Bakugo was still trapped. He was weakening, his explosions becoming smaller, more sporadic. His eyes were wide with panic, pleading for a hero who wasn't coming. And then Izuku saw him, a skeletal, blond man in a baggy t-shirt, clutching his side at the edge of the crowd. All Might. He was standing there, frozen, his face a mask of shame and self-recrimination. He was out of time. He was helpless, just as Izuku had been. In that instant, Izuku understood the hero's burden in a way he never had before. It wasn't about having the power to act. It was about the agony of not having it when it was needed most. Something inside Izuku snapped. He had done what he could from the shadows. It wasn't enough. Bakugo was going to die. Strange warning about doing no harm echoed in his mind, but a louder voice screamed over it, the voice of his own unshakable, heroic instinct. He didn't think. He acted. He burst from behind the van. His legs pumped, carrying him forward, past the police line, past the stunned heroes. No, you idiot! Stop! Death Arms yelled, reaching for him, but Izuku was already in motion. He shrugged off his backpack, swinging it forward. He opened it and threw the contents, his heavy textbooks and his grimoire, directly at the sludge villain's face. It was a desperate, foolish-looking move. A distraction. The villain flinched as the heavy books struck its eye. For a single, crucial second, its grip on Bakugo loosened. Kaken! Izuku screamed, his voice raw. Bakugo's eyes widened in disbelief. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? You looked like you needed saving. Izuku yelled back, clawing at the sludge, trying to get a grip, trying to pull his friend free. His fingers just sank into the filth. It was useless, but his actions, his sheer, insane courage, had an unintended effect. Watching from the crowd, All Might's eyes widened. He saw a small, quirkless, as far as he knew, boy, with no power, no gear, no hope of success, charging in to save a life while pro-heroes stood by. The boy was doing what All Might himself should have been doing. It was a splash of cold water to the face. Shame and adrenaline surged through the hero's emaciated body. I am pathetic, he thought. His own words to the boy on the rooftop about what it takes to be a hero. They were hollow if he stood by and did nothing. With a roar that seemed to come from his very soul, he powered up. Steam billowed from his body as muscle and mass exploded into being. All Might was here, I really am pathetic, he boomed, his iconic voice washing over the chaos. He rushed forward. Even though I admonished you, I wasn't putting what I said into practice. He grabbed Izuku, pulling him clear of the villain. Then, he turned his attention to the monster. He grabbed Bakugo's arm. Detroit. Smash! The punch was a force of nature. It wasn't just a physical blow, it was a meteorological event. The sheer air pressure of the strike blasted the sludge villain apart, splattering it against the alley walls. The clouds above, which had been gathering for a storm, were literally blown away by the shockwave. The sky cleared. And then, it began to rain, not from the storm clouds, but from the moisture All Might had condensed and wrung from the air itself. The fight was over. In the aftermath, Izuku was swarmed. The pro-heroes scolded him for his recklessness, while Bakugo was praised for his endurance. It was a bitter, familiar pill to swallow. Izuku accepted the reprimand quietly, keeping his head down, trying to be as unmemorable as possible. His secret interventions had remained secret. As far as anyone was concerned, he was just a foolish, quirkless kid who had gotten in the way. He managed to slip away from the chaos, his heart still pounding. He had done it. He had broken the rules, but he had saved him. He felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and guilt. He was walking down a quiet residential street, heading back towards the beach, when he heard footsteps behind him. Deku! Izuku froze. It was Bakugo. He turned to see his rival standing there, panting slightly, his usual arrogant sneer absent. I never asked you for help. Bakugo spat, though it lacked its usual venom. And you didn't help me. Got it? I was fine by myself. He turned to stomp away. Wait, a new voice cut in. All Might, in his skeletal form, jogged around the corner. I have been looking for you, young man, he said, breathing heavily. He looked at Izuku, and his gaze was filled with a profound, newfound respect. Your actions today were foolish. But they were also heroic. When all the other heroes, myself included, were frozen, you were the only one who acted. You spurred me to move. You reminded me what it truly means to be a hero. Izuku stared, speechless. This was a complete reversal of their conversation on the rooftop. All Might continued, his voice resonating with passion. There are stories about all the great heroes. Most have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think. That is what happened to you today. He stood tall, a fire in his eyes. Young man, you too can become a hero. Izuku's breath hitched. Those were the words. The words he had waited his entire life to hear. Tears welled in his eyes, but this time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. He had been acknowledged. He had been seen. Then All Might said the words that would change everything, for the second time. I have deemed you worthy of inheriting my power. My quirk is yours to inherit. He spread his arms wide. I am offering you my quirk, one for all. Izuku stood there, the words washing over him. The ultimate prize. The validation of his entire existence. Everything he had ever dreamed of was being laid at his feet on a silver platter. All he had to do was say yes. He looked at All Might's hopeful, expectant face. He thought of his mother, of his dream. He could go home. He could have a quirk. He could go to Yue High and become the next symbol of peace, just like he always wanted. Then, he thought of Kamartage. He thought of the cold mountain air, the scent of old books, the hum of the obsidian chamber. He thought of his grimoire, of the eldritch capture scarf, of the massive, beautiful shield born from his admiration. He thought of Doctor Strange's piercing gaze and the strange, difficult path he had been offered. One for all was a legacy. It was a power passed down, a torch to be carried. But the mystic arts, that was his. He had not inherited it. He was building it, one spark, one diagram, one painful failure at a time. It was a power that came not from his body, but from his mind and his will. He had found his own path. With a deep breath that seemed to settle the frantic fluttering in his chest, Izuku Midoriya bowed deeply to the number one hero. All Might, he said, his voice clear and steady, devoid of its usual stammer. That is the greatest honor anyone has ever offered me. Thank you? Truly. He straightened up, and for the first time, He looked his idol directly in the eye, not as a fanboy, but as an equal. But I have to decline. All Might's jaw dropped. The hopeful smile froze on his face. What? Decline? But why? This is your dream. It was, Izuku corrected him gently. But I was shown that there are other ways to be a hero. Other kinds of power. He thought of Strange's words on the rooftop. You told me to be realistic, and at the time, it broke my heart. But you were right. It wasn't realistic for me to be a hero like you. So, I found a different way. He gave All Might a small, genuine smile. Thank you for the offer, and thank you for saving us. But I've already found my own path to becoming a hero. He bowed once more, then turned and walked away, leaving the number 1 hero standing on the street corner in stunned, utter silence. Izuku felt a strange lightness in his chest. He had been offered the world, and he had chosen himself. He returned to the beach. His grimoire was there, safe where he had left it. He opened a small, crackling portal, just a hand-sized window back to his room in Kamartage, and carefully passed the book through before closing it. Then he looked at the mountains of trash. Strange had given him a task. A form of meditation. With a renewed sense of purpose, Izuku Midoriya grabbed a rusted, discarded microwave and began the long, arduous process of cleaning the beach, his heart at peace for the first time in his life. He wasn't the next All Might. He was just Izuku. And for the first time, that felt like more than enough. The rejection of One for All was a line drawn in the sand of Izuku Midoriya's soul. It was a conscious, definitive choice to abandon the path he had worshipped in favor of the one he was forging. When he returned to Kamartage through a shimmering portal summoned from the now pristine sands of Dagoba Beach, a task he'd completed with a sorcerer's focus and a hero's tenacity, he was no longer a boy, clinging to a new hope. He was a young man committed to a new reality. Dr. Strange was waiting for him in the main hall. He didn't ask for a mission report. He didn't need to. The ambient energies of the multiverse were like a cosmic newspaper to him, and Izuku's recent activities had made the front page. You were offered the keys to the kingdom you have revered your entire life, Strange stated, his voice devoid of judgment. And you refused them. It wasn't my kingdom, Izuku replied, his voice steady. He met the Sorcerer Supreme's gaze without flinching. My path is here. Strange studied him for a long moment, his piercing eyes seeming to peel back the layers of Izuku's spirit. He saw the newfound resolve, the quiet confidence that had replaced the frantic desperation. The boy had faced his ultimate temptation, and had not wavered. The crucible had not broken him, it had tempered him. Good, Strange said, the single word carrying more weight than 1,000 sentences of praise. The temptation of an easier path is a sorcerer's greatest enemy. You have passed your first true test, but do not think for a moment that your trials are over. They have just begun. He gestured for Izuku to follow him. The UA High School entrance exam is in 9 months. You still intend to take it? It wasn't a question. Yes, Sensei, Izuku confirmed. The mystic arts give me the power to protect reality. But my heart is still in my world. I want to save people from villains, to help during disasters. I want to be a hero that people can see. I need to learn how they operate, how their society functions. UA is the best place for that. A logical conclusion, Strange conceded. But you will be entering a world of physical power with a power they cannot comprehend. You will be an anomaly. You must be prepared. Your training, therefore, will now enter a new phase. We are no longer building a foundation. We are building an arsenal. And so began the 9-month crucible that would dwarf everything that had come before. It was a period of such intense, all-consuming work that the days blurred into a montage of sweat, study, and the constant, crackling hum of eldritch energy. Izuku's life was partitioned with monastic discipline. Mornings were for the body. Afternoons were for the mind. Nights were for the grimoire. The physical training with hammer became less about conditioning and more about combat application. He learned to fight not just with his body, but with his body and his magic in seamless tandem. He learned to throw a punch and simultaneously manifest an impact recoil gauntlet at the moment of contact, turning a simple jab into a devastating kinetic blast. He learned to dodge not just by moving his feet, but by opening and closing microportals for instantaneous shifts in position, a technique he meticulously dubbed portal steps in his notes. It was clumsy at first, often resulting in him reappearing off balance or facing the wrong direction, but with endless practice, it became as natural as breathing. His afternoons were spent with Strange in the deepest, most secure libraries of Kamartaj. He was no longer just learning the basics. He was delving into the theoretical. He read about the different dimensional energy sources, the faultine, the seraphim, the octessence, and learned to differentiate their textures, their energy signatures. He studied the art of warding and abjuration, learning how to weave protective spells into physical objects. He practiced scrying, staring into bowls of sanctified water until he could catch fleeting glimpses of his home city, a vital tool for reconnaissance. But it was the nights, alone in his cell-like room with only a glowing crystal for light, that his true work was done. His grimoire, once a simple notebook, had become his life's work. It was no longer just hero analysis. It was now a synthesis, a fusion of two worlds. He would spend hours poring over online hero forums and news sites on a magically shielded tablet Strange had provided, studying the latest hero debuts and support item innovations. Then, he would turn to his notebook and try to replicate them with magic. His hero-inspired constructs section became the core of his magical identity. He wasn't just copying, he was improving, innovating, and personalizing. The Eldritch Capture Scarf was the first to reach true maturity. He spent a month perfecting it. He wasn't content with it just being a magical rope. He studied Eraserhead's movements with obsessive detail, noting how the hero used the weapon not just for capture, but for mobility, for defense, for manipulating his environment. Izuku's version became a marvel of complex spellweaving. It was not one construct, but a dozen smaller energy tendrils woven together into a single, cohesive band of light that coiled around his shoulders. He learned to control each tendril independently. He could make it wide and flat to use as a temporary shield, or thin and sharp to cut through obstacles. Through sheer force of will, he imbued it with a form of rudimentary magical intelligence. It learned to anticipate his movements, to tense up before a strike, to wrap around a target with the perfect amount of pressure without a conscious command. He spent one entire week just practicing how to make it tie itself into a series of increasingly complex knots, a test of fine motor control that left him mentally exhausted but resulted in a level of precision that was breathtaking. One evening, Hammer, testing his progress, attacked him with a training staff. Instead of blocking, Izuku simply thought defend. The scarf shot out from his shoulders, two tendrils wrapping around the end of the staff, halting its momentum instantly, while a third tendril snaked around Hammer's wrist, disarming him in a single, fluid motion. Hammer stood there, stunned, looking at the glowing band of light that now held his staff gently in midair. He looked at Izuku and gave a slow, respectful nod. The weapon was no longer just a tool, it was a partner. Next, he perfected the impact recoil gauntlets. His initial design was crude, simply absorbing and redirecting force. But after studying the support items of kinetic energy heroes like Fourth Kind, Izuku refined them. He learned to store the kinetic energy he absorbed. The gauntlets would glow brighter with each blocked blow, a visible representation of the power they contained. He could then release that stored energy at will, either in a wide, concussive wave to push back multiple opponents, or a focused, armor-piercing beam. He called the release function Detroit Smash, Eldritch Rendition, a private, heartfelt tribute to the man whose power he had refused. It wasn't the same earth-shattering force, but it was a clever, tactical application that turned defense into a potent offense. His portal steps became his signature mobility tool. The initial clumsiness gave way to a dazzling, unpredictable grace. He practiced in a special chamber filled with moving obstacles, learning to chain micro-portals together. He would dive toward a solid wall, only to disappear into a swirl of orange sparks and reappear on the ceiling, then drop down behind his target. To an outside observer, it looked like a high-level teleportation quirk. But Izuku knew the truth. It was 1,000 tiny, precise calculations of spatial geometry, executed in the blink of an eye. His muttering, once a sign of anxiety, became a tool. During practice, he would whisper a constant stream of coordinates and trajectories to himself, his mind working like a supercomputer processing 1,000 variables at once. He also developed a new, more subtle skill, born from Strange's first lesson on the astral plane. He called it the astral scout. He could not maintain his astral form for long periods or travel great distances, but he discovered he could project it for a few seconds at a time. It was incredibly disorienting, a psychic whiplash, but in those few seconds he could get a perfect, bird's-eye view of his surroundings. In a complex environment like a collapsing building or a maze-like alleyway, that brief flash of omniscience was a greater strategic advantage than any physical power. It was his ultimate reconnaissance tool. As the months wore on, Strange's role shifted from that of a direct instructor to a mentor and guide. He would watch Izuku's frantic, unorthodox development with a critical eye, offering cryptic advice or presenting him with new challenges. One day, he led Izuku to one of the most sacred vaults in Kamartage. The air here was heavy with power, the silence absolute. In the center of the room, on a simple pedestal, rested a pair of simple, unadorned bracers made of a dark, star-flecked metal Izuku didn't recognize. "These are not a great weapon of power," Strange said, his voice a low reverence. "They are not the Eye of Agamotto, or the Cloak of Levitation. They will not grant you untold abilities. They are called the Bracers of Binding. They were worn by a sorcerer supreme in the 12th century who, like you, had a mind that was too loud. He found it difficult to maintain the complex energies required for high-level spellcraft." Strange picked up one of the bracers. It was cool to the touch, and seemed to absorb the light around it. "These bracers do one thing, and one thing only," he explained. "They act as a focus. A channel. They help to bind the sorcerer's will to the spell, stabilizing the flow of energy, and reducing the mental strain of maintaining a construct. They will not cast the spell for you. They will not make you more powerful. But they will make your power more efficient. They will quiet the signal noise you are always fighting against." He held them out to Izuku. "A master gives a student a tool not when they need it, but when they have earned it. Your will and your mind have brought you this far. Let these help you take the next step." Izuku took the bracers with trembling hands. They felt heavy, not just with physical weight, but with the weight of history, of trust. He slid them onto his forearms. They resized instantly, fitting snugly against his skin. The moment they settled, he felt a change. The constant, low-level hum of ambient magical energy that filled Kamartage, a background noise he had grown accustomed to, suddenly sharpened into a clear, distinct note. It was as if he'd been listening to the universe through a cheap radio, and someone had just turned the tuning dial to the perfect frequency. He raised his hand and manifested his eldritch capture scarf. The process was instantaneous. The construct was brighter, its edges more defined. It felt more solid, more real, and the mental effort required to maintain it was cut in half. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes. He looked at Strange, unable to form words. "Do not thank me," Strange said, turning to leave the vault. "Thank the part of yourself that refused to give up. Now your training is complete. The rest is up to you. Go, and show your world what a hero with an iron will and a brilliant mind can truly do." The day of the UA entrance exam arrived. Izuku stood before the towering gates of the most prestigious hero academy in Japan, not in the simple robes of Kamartage, but in a plain tracksuit. On his forearms, hidden beneath the long sleeves, were the bracers of binding. He was just another hopeful face in a sea of anxious, powerful teenagers. But inside, he was a maelstrom of calm, controlled energy. He saw Bakugo in the crowd, his familiar spiky hair and arrogant sneer a landmark of his old life. Their eyes met for a split second. Bakugo's expression was one of pure, venomous confusion. "Why are you here, you quirkless reject?" Izuku simply met his gaze with a placid calm that seemed to infuriate Bakugo even more, before turning his attention back to the gate. During the written portion of the exam, he flew through the questions. His mind, trained to analyze ancient runes and deconstruct the theoretical underpinnings of reality, found modern physics and ethics laughably simple. It was in the orientation hall that the true challenge began. President Mike was on stage, his energy overwhelming. He explained the practical exam, a mock battle in a massive, simulated cityscape. They would fight against robotic villains, each worth a different number of points. And what's a hero course without a little bit of mayhem? President Mike screamed. "Your big-ticket item is the zero-pointer. This big fella is worth 0 points. Think of him as a gimmick, a stage hazard. My advice? Avoid him." While the other students murmured in confusion or excitement, Izuku's mind was already processing. 0 points. Therefore, fighting it is a waste of time and energy. It's a test of risk assessment and threat prioritization, not just raw power. He pulled out his grimoire, disguised as a regular notebook, and began to scribble. Primary objective, villain points. Secondary, but more important, objective, rescue points. He knew from his research that UA's scoring system wasn't just about destruction. It was about heroism. Protecting others, acting selflessly. That was where the real points were. His entire strategy coalesced in seconds. He wasn't here to rack up a high score by smashing robots. He was here to be a hero. As they stood before the massive gates of Battle Center B, waiting for the start signal, Izuku took a deep breath. He could feel the familiar thrum of the bracers against his skin. He closed his eyes and for a fraction of a second, cast his astral scout. His consciousness shot upwards, giving him a perfect, three-dimensional map of the city block beyond the gate. He noted the wide boulevards, the narrow alleyways, the structurally weak-looking buildings. He had the lay of the land before the exam even began. And start. Present Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. While the other students hesitated, confused by the lack of a countdown, Izuku was already in motion. He sprinted into the city, his plan clear. He didn't seek out robots. He sought out trouble. He ran down a main street and saw a group of 3 one-point robots cornering a student with a gigantification quirk who was too large to maneuver in the tight space. Need a hand? Izuku called out. Before the student could answer, Izuku was a blur of motion. Portal step. He vanished in a swirl of sparks from the middle of the street and reappeared on a lamppost directly above the robots. Target acquired, he muttered. The Eldritch capture scarf shot from his shoulders. 2 tendrils wrapped around the cannons of the robots on the left and right, yanking them upwards and causing them to fire harmlessly into the sky. A third, thicker tendril lashed out like a whip, smashing through the central robot's optical sensor. Blinded, it stumbled and crashed into its comrades. Izuku landed lightly on the ground. You should stick to the wider streets, he advised the giant student. Your quirk is more effective there. He was gone before the student could even thank him. He ran through the city like a ghost. His power was not destructive, but surgical. He used his astral scout every 30 seconds, a brief, disorienting flash that gave him a real-time map of the battlefield. He knew where the largest clusters of robots were, and more importantly, where other examinees were in trouble. He appeared next to a girl with earphone jacks hanging from her lobes who was about to be overwhelmed by 2 two-pointers. He didn't attack the robots. He simply manifested a massive, intricate shield, his aegis of the All-Hero, between her and the robot's attack. The laser blasts dissipated harmlessly against its surface. Their armor is weakest at the joints, he shouted, before using a portal step to vanish. The girl, Jiro, stared at the spot where he'd been, then at the robots, and with newfound confidence, sent her jacks stabbing into their knee joints, disabling them. He wasn't collecting points for himself. He was acting as a force multiplier, a one-man support hero. He disabled weapons, created shields, provided tactical advice, and pulled people from the path of falling debris with targeted telekinetic shoves. His actions were so fast, so precise, that he was a legend in the making. Examinees would only catch a glimpse of a boy in a green tracksuit and a swirl of orange sparks before their problems were solved. Then, the ground began to shake. The 0-pointer rose from behind a skyscraper, its immense form blotting out the sky. It was a Goliath of steel and circuits, a walking catastrophe. Panic erupted. Everyone ran. As President Mike had advised, they avoided it. It was pointless. Izuku was about to do the same, to use the distraction to hunt down more villain points, when he heard a cry of pain. He turned and saw her. A girl with a brown bob haircut and rosy cheeks, trapped under a large slab of concrete, a result of the 0-pointer's emergence. The giant robot was lumbering directly towards her, its massive foot raised to crush her. There was no hesitation. There was no analysis. There was only the instinct he had proven to All Might months ago. His body moved before he could think. He sprinted towards the girl, his mind finally catching up and formulating a plan. Punch it? No. He didn't have that kind of power. The capture scarf? It was too big. The gauntlets? It would be like a fly punching a battleship. He needed a different solution. He needed a sorcerer's solution. He reached the girl, Achiko Uraraka. "Don't worry," he yelled, his voice strained with exertion. "I'm here." He didn't try to lift the slab of concrete. He didn't have time. He used the portal step, appearing directly beside her. He grabbed her by the arm and, with a powerful shove, pushed her clear of the rubble. She tumbled to safety, her eyes wide with shock and pain. Now it was just him and the robot. The colossal metal foot was descending, a shadow of death falling over him. He planted his feet. He held up his hands, not in surrender, but in preparation. The bracers of binding on his arms glowed with a ferocious intensity. He poured every ounce of will, every drop of energy he had into a single, desperate defense. Aegis of the Hoggoth. He screamed, naming the high-level protective spell he had only read about in the most ancient texts. Reality buckled around him. A colossal dome of shimmering, multi-layered, crystalline energy erupted into existence over him. It was a masterpiece of magical architecture, fractal patterns swirling across its surface, glowing with the power of a dying star. Crunch! The zero-pointer's foot slammed into the shield. The sound was deafening, a shriek of tortured metal and cracking energy. The ground beneath Izuka fractured from the sheer pressure. The aegis cracked, spiderwebs of light spreading across its surface. But it held. The massive robot, its momentum completely halted by an immovable object, stumbled backward, off balance. Izuka was panting, his vision blurring. The strain was immense. He knew he couldn't hold the shield for long. But he didn't need to. He just needed one more second. With his other hand, he made a sharp, circular motion. His sling ring blazed to life. And now for the exit, he gritted out. He didn't open a small portal. He tore open a massive, swirling vortex of golden sparks on the ground directly beneath the stumbling zero-pointer's feet. It was a gaping maw in the fabric of the world, a one-way ticket to nowhere. The robot's feet found no purchase. With a final, metallic groan of protest, the zero-pointer tipped backward and fell into the portal. It vanished from the cityscape as if it had never been. Izuka held the portal open for 3 more seconds, watching the empty sky, before collapsing it with a final, echoing snap. Silence. He fell to one knee, gasping for air, sweat pouring down his face. The sleeves of his tracksuit had been torn, revealing the dark, star-flecked bracers of binding, which were now glowing a dull, cool red from the exertion. The exam end siren blared. He had saved the day. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He had defeated the undefeatable enemy with 0 offensive force. He had become a hero, his way. He looked over at the girl he had saved, who was now being tended to by Recovery Girl. He had a feeling he'd be seeing her again. He had passed